الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. اللهم معلم إبراهيم علمنا ومفهم سليمان فهمنا. اللهم إنا نسألك علما نافعا ورزقا طيبا وعملا متقبلا. Alhamdulillah, we've reached the last lesson of the study of this tremendous book. Ask Allah Azza wa Jal to grant us beneficial knowledge and righteous actions, and that He allows us to continue seeking knowledge up until our death. The author, he continues, Faslun, or let's say we finished off quickly with, in the last lesson, because it was Salah time, the prohibited times that you are not allowed to pray. The prohibited times when you're not allowed to pray. And we mentioned 5 things. Out of the 2, it's after Salat al-Fajr, you're not allowed to pray. After Salat al-Asr, you're not allowed to pray. And more specifically, there's 2 more. When the sun is rising, specifically when it's rising, you're not allowed to pray. And when the sun is setting, you're not allowed to pray. So that's 4. And the 5th is Waqt al-Zawal, when the sun is dead in the middle. These are 5 times that it's prohibited for you to pray. A question arises, what if a person has a reason to pray? Are they still allowed to pray in those specific times when it's prohibited? Then the answer is yes. If a person has a reason to pray, Salatun dhatu sababin, like it is after Salat al-Asr, but you are performing Umrah, and after the Tawaf, you pray 2 rak'ahs after the Tawaf. It's Waqt al-Nahi, but are you allowed to pray? Yes, because you have a reason. Likewise, similar scenarios that is similar to that. So Tahiyyatul Masjid, if you come to the Masjid after Salat al-Asr, you pray Salat al-Asr, and then you come back to the Masjid later on, and it's still that Waqt al-Nahi. Are you allowed to pray 2 rak'ahs before you sit down? Yes, you are. وَهَكَذَا. Anything that has a reason, then it enters into the dhatu sababin, something that has a reason. As for unrestricted prayer, a sunnah that's unrestricted that you want to pray, then you're not allowed to pray that in these times, waqt al-nahi, except for one. Who remembers the one exception that we mentioned? On a specific day? Friday. Ahsant. So on a Friday, waqt al-zawal, when the sun is dead in the middle, usually it's waqt al-nahi, but on a Friday there's an exception, that before Salat al-Jumu'ah you're allowed to pray continuous 2 rak'at up until the Imam begins the khutbah. And sunnah to do that on a Friday. The best action to do before the Imam comes on Salat al-Jumu'ah is to pray those 2 rak'at. That's the most virtuous thing to do. Then he says, فصل في سكتات الصلاة. سكتات الصلاة 6 بين تكبيرة الإحرام ودعاء الافتتاح وبين دعاء الافتتاح والتعوذ وبين الفاتحة والتعوذ وبين آخر الفاتحة وآمين وبين آمين والسورة وبين السورة والركوع. He says there are a chapter heading on the times when you have sakatat, when there is a pause or some silence, if you like. And there are 6 places where there is a short span of silence or a breather, if you like. And they are, he mentions, number 1, between takbiratul ihram wa du'a al-iftitah. That between saying Allahu Akbar to enter into the prayer and reading the du'a al-iftitah, between the 2, that there is a short silence. And then he says number 2, after du'a al-iftitah and the ta'awudh, seeking refuge in Allah Azza wa Jal from the accursed shaitan, that there is a silence between them. And likewise between the ta'awudh and Surah Al-Fatiha, after seeking refuge in Allah from the shaitan and reading Surah Al-Fatiha. وَبَيْنَ آخِرِ الْفَاتِحَةِ وَآمِينَ, and between the end of Surah Al-Fatiha and saying Ameen. And number 5, between Ameen and the next chapter that you're going to read, that you read Surah Al-Fatiha, then you say Ameen, then you read the second surah, and then lastly, after you finish reading the second surah before going down to Ruku'. And this is especially important when, specifically on the 6th point, if the Imam is someone that you know, is going to take this silence before he says Ameen. And there is a virtue that your Ameen and the Ameen coincides with the Imam's Ameen. The Prophet ﷺ, he says, whoever's Ameen, saying Ameen after Fatiha, coincides with the Imam's Ameen, and it coincides with the angel's Ameen, then Allah will forgive them for their previous sins. So there is, and that is for Sahih, authentic. The highest level of authenticity is a great virtue. And the Prophet ﷺ, he mentioned that the Yahud, from the things that they are jealous of this ummah, is their unity in saying Ameen. And if that is the case, then it's important to know your Imam, the Imam that you pray behind regularly. If he's going to take this pause, then don't be someone that as soon as he says Wala Dallin, you say after him straight away. He doesn't even finish the noon, you say Ameen. Take a breather, let him breathe. Then when he says Ameen, say it with him. Okay? طيب. Then he says Faslun, next chapter, الأركان التي تلزم فيها الطمأنينة أربعة. The pillars in the prayer that is obligatory upon us to have Tumaneenah, tranquility, calmness, are 4. And he's already mentioned them, he's just mentioned them here out of emphasis again. Number 1, Ruku'. That when you are in Ruku', that you have Tumaneenah, tranquility, that you don't rush your bowing. Number 2, Al-i'tidal. That when you rise from the Ruku' and you're in the standing up position, that you have tranquility, you don't rush. Number 3, As-Sujood. That when you are in the prostration position, in Sujood, that you have tranquility, you don't rush it. And lastly, Al-Julusu bayna as-sajdatayn. That the sitting between the 2 sajdas, that you have tranquility within it, that you don't rush it likewise. All of these 4 places, you have to have tranquility within it, and they are pillars. They are pillars. He says, الطمأنينة هي السكون بعد حركة بحيث يستقر كل عضو محله بقدر سبحان الله. He says, what is tranquility? طمأنينة, what is it? الطمأنينة is سكون, calmness, stillness after movement. That every body part goes back to its original position. The timing or the equivalence of saying Subhanallah. That you have to be in sujood, still, without any movement. بقدر, the least amount is that you can say Subhanallah. And likewise, al-ruku', likewise, standing up, likewise, sitting down. So as for rushing to get up from ruku', before you have even stood and your back is straight again, you go to sujood, then this goes against the pillar. Okay? And we already discussed that previously. He says, Faslun, chapter heading, أسباب سجود السهو أربعة. The reasons for Sujood As-Sahw are 4. And what is Sujood As-Sahw first, before we go into the 4 reasons? Sujood As-Sahw is that if you make any mistake, and we're going to find out what those mistakes are, that you make up for it by performing 2 sajdas. That you perform 2 prostrations of forgetfulness at the end of the prayer. Okay? What are some of the reasons why? He says, Al-awwalu, he mentions 4 reasons. Al-awwalu tarku ba'd min ab'ad as-salati aw ba'd al-ba'd. الثاني فعل ما يبطل عمده ولا يبطل سهوه إذا فعله ناسيا. الثالث نقل ركن قولي إلى غير محله. الرابع إيقاع ركن فعلي مع احتمال الزيادة. He says, number 1, that a person leaves off one of the ab'ad, one of the obligations of the prayer, or some of the obligations of the prayer. And what are those obligations? He's going to mention it in detail in a second. What are the ab'ad al-salah that if you miss out, you have to perform Sujood As-Sahw. He's going to mention them in a second. And they are different from the pillars. These obligations are different from the pillars, and he's going to mention them in the next chapter. الثاني, number 2, فعل ما يبطل عمده ولا يبطل سهوه إذا فعله ناسيا. That he performs something on purpose. If he was to perform it by accident, it wouldn't break his salah. If he was to perform this action sahwan, accidentally, it wouldn't break his salah, so it's not one of the pillars. It's something that if he was to do by accident, he could continue his prayer. But if he was to do on purpose, then it breaks his prayer. And so, for example, some of the ab'ad that we're going to learn about, one of them is a tashahhud al-awwal. If a person on purposely misses out a tashahhud al-awwal, he purposely doesn't sit for it, then this breaks his salah. Or any other action, if he was to do it accidentally, missed the tashahhud, it was by accident, does it break his salah? No, and we're going to find that out inshallah in the next chapter. But if he does it on purpose, it breaks it. So any action that you do on purpose, but it doesn't break it when it's by accident, then this breaks a person. Or, no, did I confuse you guys? I think I confused myself. Let me say it again. الثاني, the second reason to perform Sujood As-Sahw is that a person performs something like we mentioned as a description. He does something, if he was to do it on purpose, it would break it, but if he does it by accident, it does not break it. So in this specific scenario, he performed it by accident. As for if he performed it on purpose, then it is mubtilun lis-salah. Meaning, this action, like we said in the example, if he was to do it on purpose, is he able to make it up with Sujood As-Sahw? Yes or no? La, he's not allowed. Because why? His salah is batil if he does it on purpose. So Sujood As-Sahw la yanfa'uhu. What does benefit? If he did that same action by accident, then he comes under this second category. Does that make sense now? واضح? Number 3. نقل ركني قولي إلى غير محله. Any one of the pillars that is a statement, if he moves it to other than its position, then he can perform Sujood As-Sahw, like some of the pillars that we mentioned earlier. Number 4, إيقاع ركن فعلي مع احتمال الزيادة. That a person, he performs a rukn fi'li and he increases upon it. So let's say a person does a pillar like Ruku', but because of forgetfulness they did it twice. Does that break his salah? It's by accident. What does he do? He makes it up with Sujood As-Sahw. وهكذا. طيب. Faslun, now he goes into what are those ab'ad? What are the ab'ad al-salah, the obligations of the prayer? He says, أبعاد الصلاة سبعة التشهد الأول وقعوده والصلاة على النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم فيه والصلاة على الآل في التشهد الأخير والقنوت وقيامه والصلاة والسلام على النبي صلى الله عليه وآله وصحبه فيه. He says, number 1, التشهد الأول. From the obligations is التشهد الأول, the first tashahhud. As for the second tashahhud, is it from the ab'ad? What is it? It's a rukun, it's a pillar. Ahsantum. وَقُعُودُهُ, and sitting down for it. Sitting down for what? Sitting down for what? Ahsant. We'll make sure everyone's awake. وقعوده القعود للتشهد الأول, sitting for the first tashahhud. So the tashahhud by itself is a ab'ad, is from the ab'ad, and sitting for it is a separate ab'ad from the ab'ad as well, separately. والصلاة على النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم, sending peace and blessings upon him, is from the ab'ad. And number 4, sending peace and blessings upon his family in the tashahhud al-akhir. والقنوت وقيامه, performing the qunut and standing up for the qunut, and in that same qunut that you send peace and blessings upon the Prophet ﷺ and his companions. These are some of the ab'ad of the salah. And the qunut is performed in qiyam al-layl and in some places salat al-fajr, and it could be performed in any of the obligatory prayers if a nazilah, if a calamity occurs upon the Muslim believers, and they would specifically do the loud prayers. Faslun, chapter on mubtilat as-salah, those things that nullify a person's prayer. He says, تبطل الصلاة بأربع عشرة خصلة بالحدث وبوقوع النجاسة إن لم تلقى حالا من غير حمل وانكشاف العورة إن لم تستر حالا والنطق بحرفين أو حرف مفهم عمدا وبالمفطر عمدا والأكل الكثير ناسيا وثلاث حركات متواليات ولو سهوا والوثبة الفاحشة والضربة المفرطة وزيادة ركن فعلي عمدا والتقدم على إمامه بركنين فعليين والتخلف بهما بغير عذر ونية قطع الصلاة وتعليق قطعهما بشيء والتردد في قطعهما. It says chapter heading. The Salah is nullified with 14 affairs, 14 traits, 14 things. Number one, بالحدث, that a person falls into minor impurity. That a person does number one, number two, or lets out gas. They go to the toilet. Any of these things breaks a person's wudu, and naturally they break a person's salah. So بالحدث, anything that causes a person to fall into minor impurity breaks a person's wudu, and that breaks a person's salah. So in the salah, what can occur from that? The only thing that can occur from that is breaking gas. Or something else, خرج من السبيلين. If something else exits a person's private parts, like blood or urine or the likes, then that breaks a person's salah, unless it is salis al-bawl, unless it's something that is da'imul hadath, something that a person has a sickness and it's continuous and they can't stop, like we mentioned previously. For such a person, there's an exception. A person has a sickness and they can't control that urine continuously comes out, or another najasa, then they are excused. But someone that is normal, that doesn't have that, and it occurs for whatever reason, then that is something that breaks a person's salah. وبوقوع النجاسة لم تلقى حالا من غير حمل. If a person has something that is impure on him, whether that is their clothes, their body, and they realize, let's say they didn't know at the beginning of the prayer, someone told them, or they came to see this najasa, they saw some feces on their clothes. Does it break their salah? No. It breaks their salah if they ignore it and continue praying. But if they remove it straight away, then their salah is correct. As long as they don't do haml of it, they don't use their own hand. If you have feces in your hand, let's say there's some feces there and you went, now your hand has it, how are you going to remove it from your hand except with water? بطلت صلاتك, you have to get out of salah. But let's say a person has something else. Let's say they have tissue in their pocket. Let's say they are able to, is their jacket and they can take their jacket off. A jumper, a cardigan, they can take it off. Salah, they can continue praying. Sah? That's the example. So as long as you can do that, remove it without haml, without having to touch it and the likes, then your salah continues. But if that najasa stays on there, then that breaks a person's salah, because we mentioned that it's from the shurut of the salah, that your clothes, your body and the place of prayer has to be pure from najasa. Number 3, وانكشاف العورة إن لم تستر حالا. If a person's awrah is uncovered, it breaks the salah unless they cover it as soon as they are aware. If a person is unaware, then that does not harm them. But if a person becomes aware of it, they cover themselves straight away, then their salah is correct. But if they continue like that, their salah is batil. And so, now, ala kulli hal, this one and the previous point, it occurred to the Prophet ﷺ, the previous point, that he was praying the prayer, and in the middle of the prayer he removed his shoes. And so the Prophet ﷺ, when he removed his shoes, all of this he heard, and afterwards he asked the Sahaba that they removed all of the shoes. Why are you removing your shoes? They said, "O Messenger of Allah, you removed your shoes, so we emulated that and we copied you." And so the Prophet ﷺ said, Jibreel came to me and told me that there was dirt, that there was najasa at the bottom of my shoes, so I took it off. So that's part of what he's wearing, sah? Did that break his salah, and did he say, I have to start the salah all over again? No, he took it off and he continued praying in the middle of the prayer. So this is an evidence for that. وَالنُّطْقِ بِحَرْفَيْنِ أَوْ حَرْفٍ مُفْهِمٍ عَمْدًا. They say from the mubtilat as-salah, from the nullifiers of the prayer, is that a person utters speech. And the least amount of speech is harfaini, 2 letters. That 2 letters that are understood, a person says that or one letter that can be understood amdan, on purpose, then that breaks a person's salah. Anything that a person says foreign to the prayer, and it's letters that can be understood as speech, then this breaks a person's salah, because you're not allowed to speak in the prayer. نعم وبالمفطر عمدا, that a person does any affair that breaks a person's fasting normally, if he performs that on purpose, then that breaks a person's salah. Okay? So let's say a person has some food left here, and by accident just naturally just goes, he grabs it with he puts it in his mouth and he just puts it down accidentally. Does it break his salah? Doesn't break his salah. Did you do it on purpose? Silence. Shaykh, what does the point say? Hamdan, that if you eat or if you do something that breaks your fasting on purpose, does eating by accident break your fasting? Does this break his fasting? It doesn't. واضح? But if he does any of the mufattirat amdan, it breaks his fast. طيب, what if he ate a whole plate of food by accident? That doesn't break your fast, but does that break your salah? Yes, he says the next point. وَالْأَكْلِ الْكَثِيرِ نَاسِيًا. If he eats a lot, even if it's by accident, that breaks his salah. He's praying, is he? So, that which is little, لا يفطر, لكن a person eats a lot, then there's no excuse for that. وَثَلَاثِ حَرَكَاتٍ مُتَوَالِيَاتٍ وَلَوْ سَهْوًا. That a person performs movement. One movement, haraka, is not a problem. Two movements is not a problem. But three movements and more, then even if it's by accident, then this breaks a person's salah. وَالْوَثْبَةِ الْفَاحِشَةِ, that a person jumps. And the jumping that is fahish, and a type of movement that is لا يليق بالصلاة, breaks a person's prayer. وَالضَّرْبَةِ الْمُفْرِطَةِ, likewise a beating that takes it out of the scope of prayer. Because there are times when you can do an action that is considered a dharb. But the Prophet ﷺ said, if a person comes between you and your sutra, that you push them back. If they come second time, you push them back. If they come a third time, then you fight them. Because it is indeed a shaitan. طيب. ولكن that a person does الضربة المفرطة, then that breaks a person's prayer. وزيادة ركن فعلي عمدا, that a person increases an extra rukun on purpose. So they have sujood. They said, look, I want to get closer to Allah. The closest that a slave is to Allah is in sujood. The closest that a slave is to Allah is in sujood. So I want to perform an extra sujood. Not two, I want three sujood on purpose. He breaks his salah. وَالتَّقَدُّمِ عَلَى إِمَامِهِ بِرُكْنَيْنِ فِعْلِيَّيْنِ, that a person goes ahead of the imam with two pillars that are actions. He goes in front of the imam, not one pillar, a second pillar in a row, then that broke his salah. For example, a person is praying and the imam has gone to ruku'. The follower, the ma'moom, is still in salah, still standing. That's one pillar, ruku'. He's got up from ruku'. He's done i'tidal. He's still standing up. If he doesn't catch him up, then his salah is broken. واضح? As for he's standing and he's gone to ruku', does it break his salah? No. But it is something that a person should stay away from. They have to follow the imam. فَإِذَا كَبَّرَ فَكَبِّرُوا, if he says takbir, then do takbir after him. If he does ruku', then do ruku' after him. وَإِذَا سَجَدَ فَاسْجُدُوا, if he makes sujood, then do sujood after him, as the Prophet ﷺ said. So you shouldn't go behind him and be late. So if a person does that on two pillars, then a person's salah is invalid and they've broken the mutaba'ah. Likewise, the opposite is true. Sorry, I mentioned in the opposite order. I mentioned takhalluf first, that he goes behind the imam twice. Or if he goes at-taqaddum, if he goes in front of him by two pillars. I don't know why someone would go in front of the Imam. But let's say someone is hasty. The Imam, let's say he's a bit slow to go to sujood after standing up from ruku'. سمع الله لمن حمده ربنا ولك الحمد حمدا كثيرا طيبا مباركا. Allah. He's going to sujood, he hasn't gone yet. He goes ahead of him, he's in sujood. If he was to get up from that sajda before the Imam, go 2 pillars ahead of him, that would break his salah. So in the madhab, you always have a chance. If one by accident you've gone ahead of him, you still have a chance to do istidrak, that you continue following him, you get back in line. But if you continue to go ahead of him, then that breaks a person's salah. So in front of him or behind him by 2 pillars. وَنِيَّةِ قَطْعِ الصَّلَاةِ, that a person has the intention to discontinue the prayer. If a person has the niyyah, Akhi, I'm going to stop following this Imam. He has that intention. Even if he continues in body form, but his intention, he's discontinued, then his salah is invalid. His salah has been nullified. وَتَعْلِيقِ قَطْعِهَا بِشَيْءٍ, that he makes it a condition, I will break my salah if so-and-so walks in the door right now. Him making that intention, that he's going to cut the prayer if such and such happens, whatever that affair is, him just making that intention breaks his salah. Is that clear? The Imam is praying Qiyam al-Layl and mashallah, he read Surah, he didn't know what this masjid was doing. They made an announcement beforehand. Tonight we are reading all of Surah Baqarah in 1 rak'ah, Surah Nisa or Al Imran in 1 rak'ah. And Miskeen, he was there for whole of Baqarah, just in the 2nd rak'ah, he can't handle it. He says, in his own niyyah, he says, if he does not do ruku' the next 2 minutes, I'm out. Even if he waits for that 2 minutes, he made the niyyah. If such and such doesn't occur, his salah is already broken when he made that niyyah. Is that clear? Because it's a condition to have the intention throughout the salah up until the salah ends. Okay? And it has to be continuous and there's no hesitance in it. So the last thing he says, وَالتَّرَدُّدُ فِي قَطْعِهَا, even if a person hesitates, this salah is kind of long, shall I go, shall I not go, shall I? That hesitation for niyyah is likewise something that breaks a person's salah. Taba'an, it's important to mention, we are not talking here about a person that has waswas, a person that has been afflicted with the waswas, whispers from shaitan, and they have waswas over their wudu, they repeat their wudu many times, they have waswas in their takbirat al-ihram, they have waswas in their niyyah, then we are not talking about such a person because they already have waswas. And so every time they will think that they have broken their wudu, I think I made my intention to break it. Khalas, my salah. So this will continue upon them because they already have the sickness of waswas. This does not apply to such a person. Faslun, chapter heading. الذي يلزم فيه نية الإمامة 4 الجمعة والمعادة والمنذورة جماعة والمقدمة في المطر. He says, I'll give a context to this first. He's in the fuqaha al-Shafi'iyya, they say that there are times that the Imam has to have intention to be an Imam. There are times he doesn't have to have the intention to be an Imam. There are certain scenarios where he doesn't have to have the intention and he becomes an Imam. An example of that is a person is praying by themselves. They're praying alone. They don't have the intention to be an Imam for someone else. Sah? 2 people come behind without him being aware and they make a saf behind him. He's not aware that they are following him. He does his dhuhr prayer, he does ruku', they do ruku', he does sujood, they follow him all of the rest of the actions and they are praying behind him. Is the salah sahih? The salah is sahih. There's no problem with it. He didn't have intention to be Imam, but his salah is sahih because in this scenario he doesn't need to have that. But there are other scenarios where that prayer itself, for example, is a congregation, is jama'ah. He has to have the intention. And so he mentions 4 times when the Imam, there are scenarios you don't have to, but there are times you have to. From the times you have to that they mention in here in this book is these 4 things. And the main one is the first one. He says, number 1, al-Jumu'atu. Salatul Jumu'ah, the Friday congregational prayer, the Imam has to have intention to lead the prayer. Okay? Yajib. Because this is a congregational prayer. It only occurs in congregation, doesn't occur by itself. He has to have the intention for that. وَالْمُعَادَةُ, and the rest of these other things, they are mentioned here in this book, but others, yaktafun, they suffice with that first point. And they say the rest is sunnah. All the rest are sunnah. From the things that he mentions here is number 2, if there occurs a scenario where a prayer is to be repeated, there are certain scenarios that can occur that the fuqaha mention that the salah can be prayed now, but because it's this situation, that they have to repeat it later on. Like they mentioned a person that has a jabira, that has a, when they have a cast, for example, that they put a cast on without having wudu and they can't take it off, that they pray in that state, but when later on they have to repeat it. That's what the madhab says in opinion. And so in that situation, for example, al-mu'adatu, that salah that is repeated, that a person has to have the intention, if they're leading a group of people in a similar scenario, that they have to have the intention. وَالْمَنْذُورَةُ جَمَاعَةً. The third is, if a group of people or a person makes an oath, he makes a vow, that I vow to Allah that I will pray, I will lead a prayer, or I will pray 2 rak'ahs in jama'ah. I will pray 2 rak'ahs in congregation. And he's the Imam for that. He has to have the intention to be the Imam. And the last one that they mention is if the salah is brought forth because of rain, that they are combined, that the person has intention for that salah for the Imam. These are the 4 things that they mention here in the book. Now, he says, فَصْلٌ فِي شُرُوطِ الْقُدْوَةِ. He says the conditions now for the ma'mum, the one that is behind the Imam. What's the conditions for such a person? He says they are 11. أَلَّا يَعْلَمَ بُطْلَانَ صَلَاةِ إِمَامِهِ بِحَدَثٍ أَوْ غَيْرِهِ وَأَلَّا يَعْتَقِدَ وُجُوبَ قَضَائِهَا عَلَيْهِ وَأَلَّا يَكُونَ مَأْمُومًا وَلَا أُمِّيًّا وَأَلَّا يَتَقَدَّمَ عَلَيْهِ فِي الْمَوْقِفِ وَأَنْ يَعْلَمَ انْتِقَالَاتِ إِمَامِهِ وَأَنْ يَجْتَمِعَ فِي مسجد أو في 300 ذراع تقريبا وأن ينوي القدوة والجماعة وأن يتوافق نظم صلاتهما وألا يخالفه في سنة فاحشة المخالفة وأن يتابعه. He says that there are 11 things upon him, a condition for the ma'mum, the follower of the prayer of the Imam. He says number 1, that he does not have knowledge, he should not have knowledge of anything that nullifies the prayer of the Imam, like the Imam not having wudu or breaking gas or the likes of these affairs. That he heard, for example, he saw the Imam using the toilet or doing qada al-haja, and then the Imam forgot to do wudu and he went and he led the salah. He knows that this person doesn't have wudu. He's not allowed to pray behind it. And La Ba' said that he does tanbih, that he tells him if he's able to, that you don't have wudu or the likes. Or anything similar in that regard, that a person knows this person doesn't have wudu, then they're not allowed to pray behind him. Okay? Perhaps this would be something impossible to imagine for Imam of a masjid, but let's say you're at home and one of your siblings is leading the salah and you know for sure they forgot, then this is more possible scenario. Ala kul hal, he says number 2, وَأَلَّا يَعْتَقِدَ وُجُوبَ قَضَائِهَا عَلَيْهِ, that the person praying behind is not allowed to believe about the Imam that his salah, if I pray behind him, later on I have to repeat it. He's not allowed to believe that. If he believes that praying behind this Imam, I have to repeat my prayer later on, his salah is batil. That salah is not right. And him following him is not right. And there are examples of that. From the examples that they mention in Kutub as-Sunnah is that a person, for example, he doesn't hold the permissibility of praying behind the ruler because this ruler did such and such a sin, so he holds it not allowed to pray behind him, so he prays behind him because he fears punishment or the likes of these affairs. But in the heart, he believes it's haram for him to pray behind this Imam, the ruler or the likes, and he has to repeat it when he gets home. Then his mutaba'a aslan is not allowed. And there are other scenarios that, let's say, the times when there was extreme ta'assub, partisanship to a specific madhab, that they would hold, for example, if there's another madhab leading, that my salah behind this other person in this other madhab, that my salah is incorrect. So let's say they're forced to pray behind him. They'll say, let me just pray in congregation, but I'm going to pray again at home because he's upon a different madhab. And that salah is not correct. You have to believe the permissibility of praying behind the Imam as long as he is Muslim. Even if he's a Muslim ruler, barran kana aw fajira, whether he is righteous or he is sinful, that is between him and Allah, but the salah is correct. Whether that person is upon the aqeedah of Ahlul Sunnah wal Jama'ah or he's an innovator, let alone being upon just a different madhab in fiqh. Even if he was an Ash'ari, even if he was a Sufi, even if it was any of the sects of Islam that don't exit the fold of Islam, is Muslim, then you believe the permissibility of praying behind him. The person that says, I'm not allowed to pray behind him, even if he prays behind him or he believes that he has to repeat it, then his salah of following him is not accepted. I hope that makes sense. وَأَلَّا يَكُونَ مَأْمُومًا, that the person following, the scenario here is that the person following the Imam, that Imam shouldn't be following another Imam. That you have to be following directly the Imam that's leading the prayer. You can't be in a silsila where you're following a person that's following another person. Okay, you have to directly be following the Imam. وَلَا أُمِّيًّا, and the person has to be also someone that is literate. And what does literate mean? Able to read or recite? Which one? Okay, ahsant. So linguistically, when we say illiterate, ummi, we mean someone that can't read or write. Okay? But here, the fuqaha, when they mention it, and this is something important to note, which is that every science, fiqh is a science, hadith is a science, tafsir is a science, usul al-fiqh is a science. All the different sciences, they might have one word, but they use it they have a different terminology for it when they use it specifically for that science. You might have the same word, but it has a different meaning if the muhaddithun use it, and it might have a different meaning if the fuqaha use it. So here is a slight example of that the ummi here is the one that cannot recite Surah Al-Fatiha. Why? Because it has effects upon the prayer. A person that reads Surah Al-Fatiha in an incorrect way, that it changes the meaning, that the salah is not correct. So the person leading the prayer has to be someone that can recite Fatiha. وَأَلَّا يَتَقَدَّمَ عَلَيْهِ فِي الْمَوْقِفِ, that the person following cannot go ahead of the Imam when he is following him in the prayer. وَأَنْ يَعْلَمَ انْتِقَالَاتِ إِمَامِهِ, that he knows when the Imam he moves from one action to another, that he knows when he is moving from standing position to ruku', from ruku' back up to standing, from standing to sujood, that he knows of the intiqalat of the Imam. وَأَنْ يَجْتَمِعَ فِي مَسْجِدٍ, that the one that is following, the one that's praying behind, and the Imam, the one that's leading, both of them have to be under one masjid. And so if a person is leading, for example, this masjid, we have an upstairs and we have a downstairs. As long as it's one masjid, then the prayer behind him is correct. So the sisters praying behind, their prayer is correct. If the masjid gets really full, and let's say the brothers pray downstairs, some of the brothers pray downstairs for Salatul Jumu'ah, their prayer is correct as long as it is one masjid. Or if it's not one masjid, then the distance of 300 ذراع, 300 arm's length. What does it say for? Who's got? What is it? Cubits? Does it give the equivalence in kilometers or meters or anything? Does anyone have the translation? Say again?
Approximately 144 meters.
Ahsant, Jazakallah khair. Approximately 144 meters. So at that distance, then it's covered that you can pray behind the Imam still, even if it's not one masjid, let's say it's an outward place. Okay? طيب. He says, وأن ينوي القدوة أو الجماعة, that he has the intention of the congregation, that he's praying the congregational prayer. وأن يتوافق نظم صلاتهما, and that the outward actions and appearance of the two prayers are the same, meaning that both of them have to be praying the same number of rak'at. That you're praying 4, you're praying 4. That the nazm of the salah has to be similar. And so that takes out the one that is praying maghrib and another one is praying isha. The nazm of it is not the same. So in the madhab, the person that's praying this can't pray behind that one. وَأَلَّا يُخَالِفَهُ فِي سُنَّةٍ فَاحِشَةٍ الْمُخَالَفَةِ, that he does not oppose him in something that is considered sunnah. If he was to oppose him in that thing, something that's sunnah that you don't have to do, or leaving it off it is fine. That if the imam is doing it, that the ma'moon should do it too. And it's specifically if there is a big difference between the one doing and the one not doing it. And so, for example, there are light sunnahs that doesn't affect. It's not fahish. Like, for example, that the imam decides to not recite a second surah. It's sunnah to recite a second surah. The loud prayer, for example. That he doesn't read it. Does it break his salah? Sunnah, صح? طيب. That doesn't. But let's say there is something that they do, the imam does, and the imam doesn't follow him in that, and that's considered a big difference. Fahish, and that breaks the salah. وَأَنْ يُتَابِعَهُ, and the ma'moom has to follow the imam. That he has to follow the imam. If he's not following him and he's doing his own thing, then that is not considered congregation. طيب. We're nearly finished. He says, في صور القدوة, he says different types of congregation or leading. He says, سورة القدوة تسع, there are 9 types. تصح في 5, it's correct in 5 scenarios. قدوة رجل برجل, the leading of a man over another man. وقدوة امرأة برجل, the leading of a man over a woman, that a woman follows a man leading the prayer. وقدوة خنثى برجل, that a man leads a khuntha. وقدوة امرأة بخنثى, that a khuntha leads a woman. وقدوة امرأة بامرأة, that a woman is led by another woman. That women praying in congregation, that one woman leads the other women, that's fine. وتبطل في 4, and it is invalid in 4 scenarios. قدوة رجل بامرأة, that a man is led by a woman. That woman prays and leads the salah, and there is a man praying behind her, then that salah is invalid. So when you see like a video of somewhere in America, there's a masjid where a woman's leading salah in front of a bunch of men, then that salah is batilun bi-ijma' al-muslimin. By the consensus of the Muslims, that salah is batil. وقدوة رجل بخنثى, that a khuntha leads a man, and likewise a woman leading a khuntha, and likewise a khuntha leading a khuntha. These all situations that the salah is batil. He says, فصل شروط جمع التقديم 4, the conditions for the combining of the prayers and bringing it forth. There's jam'u taqdeem and jam'u ta'khir. We can either pray dhuhr and asr combined in the first of the 2 prayers in dhuhr time. Or we can do jam'u ta'khir, we can delay the combining. We pray dhuhr and asr in the time where it's usually asr. So either you bring it forward or you bring it back. Both of them are allowed. He mentions the conditions for them. The condition for the first, bringing the salah forward into one of the earlier times. So let's say Maghrib and Isha, you pray them in the Maghrib time usually. The conditions are 4, he mentions al-buda'atu bil-ula, that you begin with the first prayer first. That you begin with Maghrib before Isha. That you begin with Dhuhr before Asr. If you do the opposite, if you pray Isha first, then you pray Maghrib, then that combining is invalid. وَنِيَّةُ الْجَمْعِ فِيهِمَا, that you have the intention that you are combining between the two. If you don't have the intention that you just pray this, and then later on you say, you know what, I'm just going to do this. No, you have to have the intention that you are combining the two. Okay? Obviously you say Assalamu alaikum, then you go into the next one, straight after it. وَالْمُوَالَاتُ بَيْنَهُمَا, that you pray one straight after the other. That you pray Maghrib, straight after it you pray Isha. You don't perform a Sunnah prayer. You don't say I'm praying Maghrib, and I'm going to pray the Sunnah of Maghrib, then I'm going to combine it with Isha. No, there has to be muwala. You don't say, look, Maghrib, the time is, mashallah, or Dhuhr, the time is long. I'm going to pray Dhuhr, then I'm going to pray Asr in an hour's time. Dhuhr time is 5 hours. I'm going to pray Dhuhr straight away, and I'm going to combine it with Asr, but I'm going to do it an hour later. La, there has to be muwalat, it has to be straight after one another. طيب, وَدَوَامُ الْعُذْرِ, that the excuse, whatever excuse that they have to combine, has to continue by the time that they start the second prayer. So let's say the excuse is that they were traveling or sickness or whatever the case is, that they are allowed to combine, or rain, for example. That Maghrib time, it's raining. You can see outside it's raining, or when you come into the masjid you can see it's raining. By the time you've finished Maghrib, someone looks outside or someone comes in the masjid, it's completely dry outside. Are you allowed to combine it with Isha? If the excuse is rain, that excuse is gone, and let's say it's dry outside in a hot country, then can you pray Isha? You can't combine Isha because the excuse is gone. So the excuse has to continue by the time, for that time. فصل في شروط جمع التأخير. Now the conditions for delaying the prayer into the latter. So Dhuhr and Asr in Asr time, or Maghrib Isha in Isha time. The conditions for that are two. He says, نية التأخير وقد بقي من وقت الأولى ما يسعها. That you have the intention in the first of the two prayers, that you have the intention that you're delaying this prayer to the next time. So it's Dhuhr and Asr. You purposely don't pray Dhuhr in Dhuhr time. Why? Because you have the intention to combine it later with Asr. That's important to note. Why? Person could delay Dhuhr up until Dhuhr exited. Dhuhr is gone now, Asr's entered, and he's like, subhanAllah, never prayed Dhuhr. Subhanallah. Then he says, oh yeah, I'm traveling anyway. You know what, I'm just going to combine. He never had the intention to combine. So he's athim. Is that clear? You have to have the intention in the first one that you're delaying it because you're going to combine it. Not because you missed it and then you say, oh, anyway, I can still combine, it's fine. You have the intention the first time while there's still time left of the first. وَدَوَامُ الْعُذْرِ إِلَى تَمَامِ الثَّانِيَةِ. Likewise, again, the excuse for whatever reason you're performing this combining has to continue up until you complete the second of the prayers. فَصْلٌ فِي شُرُوطِ الْقَصْرِ سَبْعَةٌ. He says the conditions for shortening the prayer. That you pray Dhuhr instead of 4, you pray Dhuhr 2. وَهَكَذَا. That's shortening now from 4 to 2. So we did combining. It's possible that a person combines a full prayer. If there is excuse. They're not traveling, there's excuse. The rain, that you pray 3, that you pray Isha 4. You didn't shorten it. That's combining. As for shortening, changing the 4 to 2, then he mentions the conditions for them. He says, أَن يَكُونَ سَفَرُهُ مَرْحَلَتَيْن. That a person travels, and that travel has to be a distance of marhalatain, which is a rough estimate of 80 kilometers. They give a rough estimate of 80 kilometers. So a person travels the distance that is 80 kilometers or more. Then they can shorten their prayer to 2 rak'ahs. وَأَن يَكُونَ مُبَاحًا. And that travel that you travel for is a permissible travel. It's not a travel for something that is haram. If a person is traveling to go to a music concert, can they say, I'm going to shorten my prayer Dhuhr to 2? La, you're going to haram. This is a rukhsah, this is an ease that Allah Azza wa Jalla has given because of the difficulty of traveling. You're traveling to haram, you don't deserve that ease. وَالْعِلْمُ بِجَوَازِ الْقَصْرِ. That person has to have knowledge that it's permissible for them to shorten. That they can't just do whatever they like. They know that this is part of the Sharia. وَنِيَّةُ الْقَصْرِ عِنْدَ الْإِحْرَامِ. That when you are entering into the Salah, that you have the intention, just before you enter the Salah, that you are shortening. You're not in the Salah in the first rak'ah and then you say, you had the intention to pray 4, and then in the middle of the Salah you say, subhanAllah, I'm traveling, I can do 2 anyway. So you change your niyyah in the salah. Like you have to do it when you are going to the salah. وَأَن تَكُونَ الصَّلَاةُ رُبَاعِيَّةً. That the salah is 4 because Fajr doesn't shorten and Asr doesn't shorten. It has to be Dhuhr, Asr or Isha. وَدَوَامُ السَّفَرِ إِلَى تَمَامِهَا. That the safar, that travel has to be continuous up until you finish that travel. As for if you are traveling and then you've become resident, and you haven't prayed Maghrib and Isha yet, you delayed it, Jum'u Ta'khir. When you get back home to your residence, your city, are you allowed to? You're allowed to combine still, but are you allowed to shorten it? No, you're back to residence. That excuse that you had for shortening has gone. Traveling, you're not traveling anymore. So you have to pray 3 and 4. Okay? وَأَلَّا يَقْتَدِيَ بِمُتِمٍّ فِي جُزْءٍ مِّن صَلَاتِهِ. That if you want to shorten, you're not allowed to pray any of your prayer behind someone that is praying a complete prayer. If there's someone that is resident that's praying 4 rak'ahs, if you pray, let's say you caught late and you caught 1 rak'ah with the Imam and he's praying 4. Are you allowed to say, oh, I'm a traveler, I'm just going to add 1 more rak'ah and I've prayed my 2? La. Because the Imam is praying 4 and you prayed behind the Imam that's praying 4, you have to pray the same prayer, so you have to complete 4. So it makes sense. Any part of your prayer, you have to pray the prayer of the Imam. Faslun, conditions of Jumu'ah. He says the conditions of Jumu'ah are 6. أن تكون كلها في وقت الظهر. That Salatul Jumu'ah is established, all of it, in the time of Dhuhr. Not before Dhuhr and not after Dhuhr. It has to be in the time of Dhuhr. The same time Dhuhr comes in, that's the time you pray Salatul Jumu'ah. وأن تقام في خطة البلد. That it is performed in the city. وأن تصلى جماعة. That it is performed in a congregation. وأن يكونوا, how big is a congregation? In the madhab they say, وأن يكونوا 40 أحرارا ذكورا بالغين مستوطنين. The condition for that congregation is that they have, in the madhab, there's different opinions, but in the madhab al-Shafi'i, it says that they have to be 40 male adults that are resident in that city. Those 40 have to be, in order to make up that number, they can't be travelers, they can't be children, they can't be women, they can't be slaves. Yes, if any of these 4 come, their Jum'ah is sahih. But for that 40 number to be considered, they have to be these ones, because these are the ones that is obligatory upon. Jum'ah is not obligatory upon women, it's not obligatory upon children, it's not obligatory upon a slave, it's not obligatory upon someone that is a traveler. وَأَلَّا تَسْبِقَهَا وَلَا تُقَارِنَهَا جُمْعَةٌ فِي تِلْكَ الْبَلَدِ. It says here that there is not another Jum'ah that has come before it or the same time as it. Another Jum'ah that has come before it or the same time as it in one balad, in one city. Taban, back in the day, cities and lands and villages were like villages, they were small. So, even if they had small masajid that they would pray Salah in, they would close those masajid for Friday and they would pray in one masjid altogether. And so if there is one masjid that you pray in that one masjid together, if the city is larger, then it's allowed to have more than one Jum'ah, especially now in the cities that exist in the world today. The cities have become massive, they're not villages anymore. And so it's allowed to have more than one Jum'ah in one city. But this is an important point that it's not befitting to build a masjid right next to another masjid when there is no need, and to have Jum'ah in both of them. In some areas, especially in the UK, you might have 3 masajid. In that whole area, there's no masajid. And then in one little corner, there's 3 masjids next to each other. And all of them are doing Jum'ah. Spread out shway would have been better. Or come together. This one's going to have maybe 20 people, 20 people, 20 people. Close the 2 of them, open one, and you can have 60 people together. There's more reward in the bigger Jama'ah. على كل حال, that's something that is important. وأن يتقدمها خطبتين. That the Friday sermon has to be, the Friday prayer, has to be preceded by 2 khutbahs. The first khutbah he sits down and then the second khutbah. Faslun, some of the conditions of the khutbatain, the first khutbah and the second khutbah, some of the conditions, there are 5. Hamdullahi fihima, that you have to praise Allah in the first and the second khutbah. Wassalatu ala nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam fihima, that you send peace and blessings upon the Prophet sallallahu in both of them. Wal wasiyatu bit taqwa fihima, that a person advises and counsels the audience and the congregation with the fear of Allah, with taqwa in the first khutbah and the second khutbah. These are conditions in the madhab. وَقِرَاءَةُ آيَةٍ مِّنَ الْقُرْآنِ فِي إِحْدَاهُمَا, that you have to at least recite one verse in one of the two khutbahs, which is an important point to note, because maybe a khutbah, some people perhaps will perform some of the khutbah, maybe they will give a whole khutbah and talk about politics and talk about this and talk about that, and they don't mention one ayah, they don't mention one hadith. This has to be a wa'd, and there has to be in it ayah, there has to be in it a reminder to fear Allah. He says, وَالدُّعَاءُ لِلْمُؤْمِنِينَ وَالْمُؤْمِنَاتِ فِي الْأَخِيرَةِ, that there is dua for the believers, male believers and female believers, at the end of the khutbah. That you make that dua at the end for the believers. These are the some of the conditions, or some of the pillars, of the khutbatain. Then he mentions some of the conditions of the khutbatain. فَصْلٌ شُرُوطُ الْخُطْبَتَيْنِ عَشَرَةٌ. The conditions of the khutbatain, the two khutbahs of the Friday sermon, are 10. الطهارة عن الحدثين الأصغر والأكبر. That a khatib is pure from any of the impurities, any minor impurity or major impurity. He has to have tahara of the two types. وَالطَّهَارَةُ عَنِ النَّجَاسَةِ فِي الثَّوْبِ وَالْبَدَنِ وَالْمَكَانِ. That the khatib has to be pure in their body, in their clothing, and in the place that they are doing the khutbah and praying. وَسَتْرُ الْعَوْرَةِ. That the khatib has to cover their awrah. وَالْقِيَامُ عَلَى الْقَادِرِ. That the khatib has to give the khutbah standing up if he is able. If he's not able, then that's a different case, and he is the official khatib. If he's not able, then that's a different case. But if he is able, then he has to give the khutbah standing up, as the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam would do so. وَالْجُلُوسُ بَيْنَهُمَا فَوْقَ طُمَأْنِينَةِ الصَّلَاةِ. That the khatib has to sit down between the two khutbahs. That when he finishes the first khutbah, that he sits down in tranquility, then he gets up for the second. That julus is a shart. وَالْمُوَالَاتُ بَيْنَهُمَا. That the two khutbahs is one straight after the other. That means you're not allowed to have anything foreign that comes in between them. And so if the khatib does the khutbah, the first part, that little short break, it's not allowed for a person to get up and to start advertising that we are going to raise money for the masjid or for this cause or for that cause, because this is an act of worship that is connected together. So al-muwalat. And likewise, وَالْمُوَالَاتُ بَيْنَهُمَا وَبَيْنَ الصَّلَاةِ. Likewise, you have to follow up the two khutbahs straight away with the prayer. So again, you're not allowed to do an announcement for any type, especially fundraisers and the likes, after the khutbah and before the salah. The khutbatain and the salah are connected. So you have to do one after the other. وَأَن تَكُونَ بِالْعَرَبِيَّةِ. The khutbah has to be in the Arabic language. This is what it says in the madhab and in the Hanafi madhab and other madhab. But the ulama, they mention that it's permissible if the people are foreign, they don't speak the Arabic language, that you تُخَاطِبُهُمْ بِلُغَتِهِمْ, that you address them in their language. This is allowed. And so, if the people understand Arabic and they're in a Muslim country, then the best thing is to do it in Arabic. But if we are in England or the likes, then it's allowed. وَأَن يَسْمَعَهَا أَرْبَعُونَ. That 40 people have to hear it, because it's a condition in the Shafi'i madhab that 40 people are in the congregation. And lastly, وَأَن تَكُونَ كُلُّهَا فِي وَقْتِ الظُّهُرِ. That the two khutbatain and the prayer, all of them are in the time of al-dhuhr. This is a condition, as we mentioned, and we mentioned it earlier as well. The last, or second to last chapter, this is Kitab al-Janaiz, the chapter of the funeral rites. فَصْلٌ فِيمَا يَلْزَمُ لِلْمَيِّتِ. What is obligatory for, or with regards to the deceased, the Muslim that has passed away. He says, الَّذِي يَلْزَمُ لِلْمَيِّتِ أَرْبَعُ خِصَالٍ غُسْلُهُ وَتَكْفِينُهُ وَالصَّلَاةُ عَلَيْهِ وَدَفْنُهُ. That the Muslim that passes away, they have 4 things that is obligatory upon us. 4 things. Number 1, غُسْلُهُ. That the deceased Muslim is washed. Number 1. Number 2, وَتَكْفِينُهُ. That they are shrouded with garments. Number 3, وَالصَّلَاةُ عَلَيْهِ. The funeral prayer over them. That the Muslims pray over that Muslim deceased. And last, دَفْنُهُ. That they are buried. These are the 4 things that is obligatory with regards to the Muslim that has passed away. And he goes into each one of them in detail. He says the first which is the ghusl, the washing. فصل أقل الغسل تعميم بدنه بالماء وأكمله أن يغسل سوأتيه وأن يزيل القذر من أنفه وأن يوضئه وأن يدلك بدنه بالسدر وأن يصب الماء عليه ثلاثة. He says, with regards to washing, then the least that is obligatory with regards to the deceased is to make sure that the whole body is encompassed with water. That the water, when they're being washed, it reaches all of their body. وَأَكْمَلُهُ, and the better and the sunnah and the complete washing is that a person washes the private parts of this deceased. وَأَن يُزِيلَ الْقَذَرَ مِنْ أَنْفِهِ, that they remove any filth from their nose. وَأَن يُوَضِّئَهُ, that he performs wudu for this person, that the body limbs where wudu is performed upon, that you do it for the deceased, that you wash them. يُوَضِّئَهُ, that he makes wudu on them. وَأَن يَدْلُكَ بَدَنَهُ بِالسِّدْرِ, that he wipes on their body. الدلك is the performing of wiping or cleaning with the touching of something. Okay, so the least amount is that you pour water. Dalk is extra. So here that you do dalk, that you wipe them with a sidr, which is a type of something that makes the body smell nice. وَأَن يَصُبَّ الْمَاءَ عَلَيْهِ ثَلَاثًا, that you pour water over them 3 times. So this is the more complete version of the washing. But if for whatever reason there is little water, or there is an urgency, or there is not the facility, the least is that you make water reach the whole body. That's the right of a Muslim that has deceased. That's number 1. غسله, the washing of the dead. Number 2 is takfinuhu, the shrouding, that the Muslim deceased is to be shrouded. With what? How? He says, and how much? He says, أقل الكفن ثوب يعمه وأكمله للرجل 3 لفائف وللمرأة قميص وخمار وإزار ولفافتان. He says the least amount of kafan, shrouding, is that they are covered completely with a garment. That their body cannot be seen, is completely covered with one garment. That's the least amount. And that is in accordance to ability. And if there isn't, then with whatever you are able. As occurred to As-Sahabi al-Jalil, the great noble companion Mu'adh ibn Jabal. That after the battle of Uhud, after he was martyred, they couldn't find anything to cover him with, except a sheet that if they were to cover his feet, it would be short, it wouldn't cover his face would be uncovered. And if they was to cover his face, it would be short, it would uncover his feet. So the Prophet ﷺ, he said, cover his head, his face, and put some leaves or the like on his feet. And so there was nothing else. But we're talking about if you have, and the least is a garment that covers the whole body. وَأَكْمَلُهُ لِلرَّجُلِ, and as for the more complete version, then for the man, it is ثَلَاثُ لَفَائِف, that a garment that you can wrap around, three garments if you like. That's for the man, the more complete version. What does it say in the translation?
So do you have managed 3 wrappings?
Naam, 3 wrappings. Naam. 3 wrappings, 3 times the lafaif that the garment goes over them. And as for the women, قَمِيسٌ وَخِمَارٌ وَإِزَارٌ وَلِفَافَتَانِ, that a qamis, a shirt, a khimar, which covers the head, wa izar, a garment that covers the lower body, and then lifafatan, then 2 wrappings or 2 garments that are wrapped around them. This is the more complete for the women folk. Faslun, then he goes into the 3rd, which is as-salatu alayhi. That which is obligatory with regards to the Muslim that is deceased, that we pray over them. And this is fardun kifai. This is a collective obligation upon the Muslim ummah, that some of the believers, they have to pray over a Muslim. And if none of them pray over this Muslim, they are all sinful. And if a group of the believers pray over them, then the sin or the obligation has been removed from the rest of them. Faslun, أركان صلاة الجنازة سبعة. This prayer, the funeral prayer, has 7 pillars. الأول النية. Number 1 is the intention. That you have the intention that you are performing the funeral prayer. Number 2, أربع تكبيرات. That this funeral prayer consists of 4 takbirat. Takbir means Allahu Akbar. That it consists of 4 Allahu Akbars. There is no ruku', there is no bowing, there is no sujood, there is no prostration. You're standing up and you say Allahu Akbar 4 times. What do you say in between those 4 times? He says, he mentions also from the pillars is al-qiyam. He's going to mention what you say in a minute. Al-thalith, from the pillars is al-qiyamu ala al-qadir, that you stand for the funeral prayer if you're able. If you're not able, then you sit down. If you're not able, then you lie down, whatever you're able to perform. Number 4, qira'atul fatiha. After the first takbir, after the first Allahu Akbar, then you recite Surah Al-Fatiha. And you do not need to read Du'a ul-Istiftah. The dua that you begin the prayer with in normal prayers, you don't read that in Salatul Janazah. That you begin with Surah Al-Fatiha. After the second takbir, what do you read? The 5th pillar, As-Salatu ala al-Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam ba'da al-Thaniya. That you send peace and blessings upon the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam after the second takbir. The least amount is Allahumma salli wa sallim ala nabiyina Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And the more complete version is the Salat al-Ibrahimiyya. Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ala ali Muhammadin kama sallaita ala Ibrahim wa ala ali Ibrahim innaka Hamidun Majid, until the end of it. You say this after the second takbir. Next, after the third takbir, you make a dua lil mayyit ba'da al-thalitha, that you make dua, the supplication for the deceased after the third takbir. And there are a number of narrations that have been reported from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And so yahsun, it is something that is encouraged that you learn these du'as before a loved one and a family member and a close friend passes away. So that when it occurs, and it will occur today or tomorrow or the day after, that you are ready, that you've memorized the dua that needs to be read for the deceased. That you are able to give them that dua. That the Prophet ﷺ, he said over one of his companions, so much so that another companion heard the dua of the Prophet ﷺ that he made. And he said, oh how, the Sahabi hearing it as alive says, oh how I wish that I was the one that was dead in that position. And the Prophet ﷺ made that dua for me. What is that dua? Memorize it. Okay, Allahumma ghfir lahu. Allahumma ghfir lahu warhamhu wa'afihi wa'afu anhu wa akrim nuzulahu wa wasi' mutakhalahu, up until the end of it. Long hadith that mentions the dua for the mayyit, and there are other duas, and it's allowed to make it generic if you have not memorized those specific ones. And lastly, after the 4th takbir, that you say Assalamu alaikum to exit the prayer. And so this is considered a prayer. Why? We mentioned a definition of prayer, I think last week or the week before. Who remembers the definition of the prayer? In your own words. ما في؟ طيب, we said أعمال مخصوصة وأفعال مخصوصة تبدأ بالتكبير وتختتم بالتسليم, أو تستفتح بالتكبير وتختم بالتسليم. Specific actions, specific statements that begin with takbir, Allahu Akbar, and end and conclude with Assalamu alaikum. This is the definition of prayer. So does this definition, the Salat al-Janazah, enter into that definition? Yes, because there are specific actions. You're standing, you're raising your hands for Allahu Akbar. Specific statements, the du'as and the things that you're reading. It begins with Allahu Akbar and it ends with Assalamu alaikum. So this is prayer. And it's referred to as Salatul Janazah. So what does that mean? That means that you have to have wudu for Salatul Janazah. That means you have to have wudu for Salatul Janazah. You have to stay away from najasa, minor impurity, major impurity. Your body, your clothes, and the place of your prayer all has to be pure, just like we said for the normal prayers. Now, Faslun, number 4, the last thing that's obligatory, he says, is fi dafn al-mayyit, is the burial of the deceased. He says, أقل الدفن حفرة تكتم رائحته وتحرسه من السباع وأكمله قامة وبسطة. He says that the least amount that is accepted for the burial, that's obligatory, is a hole in the ground that you can bury the body, that removes the stench of the dead from reaching this deceased person, from reaching the people that are alive. And secondly, protects the body because it's under the ground, even if it's just a hole and is covered, then is also protected from the siba', from any wild animals or the likes, from harming that body. So that's the least amount, that you dig a hole in the ground and then you bury them in there and you cover it up. And akmaluhu, and the more complete, is that you dig the distance of qamatun wa basta, the distance of a standing person and a handful more. Yani roughly 6 feet. Yani roughly 6 feet. Okay? That the qama, the standing of a person, is as deep as a person to stand inside of it and a bit extra. Okay? That's the more complete version of the defin, how deep it should be. نعم. فصل فيما ينبش له الميت. ينبش الميت لأربع خصال: للغسل إذا لم يتغير، ولتوجيهه إلى القبلة، وللمال إذا دفن معه، وللمرأة إذا دفن جنينها معها وأمكنت حياته. He says 4 reasons why the deceased that is already buried in the ground is allowed to be taken out and undug from the ground. It's haram, you're not allowed to do it usually, but there are 4 exceptions to the case. He mentions number 1, that they forgot to wash the body. That the body, let's say there was only one family dealing with it and they didn't know about the ghusl or the likes, and then someone came and told them. If it was recent and the body hasn't changed, then it's allowed to take the body out and to wash it and then to bury it again. If the body hasn't changed. As for if it's decomposed and the likes, then it's not allowed. وَلِتَوْجِيهِ إِلَى الْقِبْلَةِ. Second reason, if the body was not facing the qibla, it's allowed to dig the grave to make it face the qibla. Number 3, وَلِلْمَالِ إِذَا دُفِنَ مَعَهُ. If there was some wealth buried with him, if wealth was buried with that body, it's allowed to dig up in order to take the wealth out. Number 4, وَلِلْمَرْأَةِ. If a woman that was pregnant is buried, she's been washed, she's been shrouded, she was pregnant and she's buried, and then it's possible that that janeen, that the baby inside the womb is still alive. And so they didn't know about it, and someone told them about the hukum, that they dig up the body and they take the baby out if it's possible for it to be still alive. Okay, so these are exceptions to the case. وَأَمْكَنَتْ حَيَاتُهُ. As for if it's impossible that the baby's alive, like it's been buried for a year and then they say, yo, she was pregnant. That's impossible. على كل حال, these are exceptions to the case. He says, فَصْلٌ في حكم الاستعانات. Rulings is a separate case here. It just talks about the rulings of seeking help. That it is I'll read it. الاستعانات أربع خصال. The seeking aid is of 4 types: مباحة وخلاف الأولى ومكروهة وواجبة. That which is permissible, that which is better not to do it, that which is disliked, and that which is obligatory. فالمباحة, that which is permissible, here تقريب الماء. That you seek aid, help, that someone brings closer to you some water. وخلاف الأولى is better not to ask for help. Here صب الماء على نحو المتوضئ is that you ask someone, seek the help of someone to pour water for you. If you are performing wudu, for example, that you ask someone, it is better for you not to do so and to do it yourself. والمكروهة, that which is disliked to ask, is here لمن يغسل أعضاءه. It is disliked to ask someone else to wash your body limbs. But if a person has to, like they are bedridden or they've become injured, and so they have to ask someone else to help them wash their body for wudu, then it's obligatory in that case. But if a person is able and is disliked, that person asks for that. Well, wajibatu, that which is obligatory, is the scenario I just mentioned, is for the person that is sick if they are unable. So someone that's bedridden or the likes, and they have to perform wudu, that they ask someone to help perform wudu for them, then it's obligatory in that case. Faslun, next chapter, he says, in the last chapter of this book, Kitab al-Zakah, the chapter of Zakah. He says, فيما تجب فيه الزكاة. What is it obligatory upon you to give zakah upon or from? He says, الأموال التي تلزم فيها الزكاة ستة أنواع. The wealth and the types of wealth that is obligatory upon you to give zakah from are of 6 types. Number 1, النعم, livestock, camels, sheep, cows. And there's detail in this bab, and we're not going to mention it here. If you reach a certain threshold, that you have to start giving zakah. And if you're below that threshold, if you own less than that, so for camels it's 5. If you own 3 camels, you don't have to give zakah. If you own 5, then you have to give zakah. What is the zakah? You learn it in the bigger books of fiqh. One naqdan, so camels, sheep, cows, and each one have a separate number. One naqdan, likewise gold and silver, and that which is equivalent to it is likewise zakah is given from it if it reaches a threshold. Wal mu'asharat, likewise those things that are crops that grow in farms, and they have rules as well. If you or use your own water, or if rain comes upon it, or is from without any of your work that Allah Azza wa Jalla sends down rain upon it, there's different ahkam on how much you give from the crops. How long does it take? Is it at the time of harvesting? Is it a year? The details of it are mentioned in larger books. And then he mentions also وَأَمْوَالُ التِّجَارَةِ, the wealth that you have up for sale, or the items that you have up for sale. That you have, let's say you have 3 cars that you are selling, you put it on the market. This is now an item that you are putting out to sell. You don't drive it and have it for personal use, it's there to be sold. And there are rules. If it reaches a year and it still hasn't been sold, and for a whole year it was in the market, then you give zakah from it. واجبها ربع عشر قيمة عروض التجارة, 2.5%. والركاز, he also mentions the rikaz, that which is found from the amwal of or the wealth of jahiliyyah. Let's say someone finds a coin and it's got the face of a king, King Edward, so this one or that one. You find it in your garden. طيب, there's zakah upon it. The rikaz, the wealth that you find of jahiliyyah, then you have to give zakah from it. Wal ma'din, and that which is also dug up, like in mines. So things that are found in mines and mined and the likes, then they are likewise zakah is to be given from it. How much? That is the next book, inshallah ta'ala. And with that, officially, Safinat al-Najah has been completed. The author only wrote up to here and intended by way of it an introduction into the affair of fiqh. And then in the next book, you learn the 4 arba' of fiqh, 4 different segments of fiqh. The ibadat, the actions of worship, and they are salah, beginning with tahara, purification, salah, janaiz, zakah, siyam, hajj. This is 1 rubu' ibadat, the actions of worship. And from here, he only mentioned tahara, salah, janaiz, and just a little introduction into, a teaser into zakah. There are other books that are specific to all of those ibadat. The next rubu' is mu'amalat, the transactions. Riba, what is riba? What is the different contracts that are allowed, that are not allowed? This all comes into mu'amalat. That's 1 segment. Another segment is fiqh al-usra, everything that's related to family matters, marriage, divorce. If a couple are divorced, who takes charge of children, havana. All of those rulings, they come into fiqh al-usra. And then you have the last segment, which is jinayat, which is the Islamic legal rulings and punishments and the likes of these affairs. These are the main 4 segments that are mentioned in the Kutub al-Fiqh, al-Arba' al-Fiqh al-Arba' or al-Arba' al-Fiqh. And they يختلفون, the fuqaha, sometimes they differ in mentioning certain things in certain places. Like some fuqaha, they will mention jihad in kitab al-ibadat. Some of them will mention it as part of jinayat. وهكذا يختلفون. Lakin in short, these are 4 different segments of fiqh. The next book that is studied after Safinat al-Najah, whether you study it with me or someone else, is Matan Abi Shuja'a. And that has all 4 arba', it has the complete fiqh from the beginning to the end. And so if Allah Azza wa Jal gives us life, that we will explain that in the upcoming next opportunity that we have, inshallah ta'ala. هذا والله أعلم وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على نبينا محمد.